Peter, you're very welcome to the programme. Let's start with the 3 Metropolitan Police officers guilty of gross misconduct for accessing those Sarah Everard files. It's just disgraceful.
It truly is. And of course, they've done this using computers, and they're foolish enough perhaps to not realise that every keystroke leaves a trace, which is why they've been caught, and rightly so. There is this bizarre thing going on in policing at the moment, whereby certain officers are accessing files they shouldn't do, wanting pictures of crime scenes that they don't need for any particular purpose, some to share with friends, some to share with family. If you're a police officer, you've signed the Official Secrets Act. You've made a pledge to serve the Crown and the public. And you should do what your job is within the parameters of your specific role. It is not your place to go being inquisitive about other cases over which you have no input and therefore should have zero interest.
And they don't concern you. It's none of your business.
Absolutely. They're not cases you're working on. You're not an investigator. You're not a detective. So simply do not go probing for information, images that are not your concern.
This is a gross misconduct panel sacking Constable Myles McHugh over the misconduct. A panel also said Met Detective Constable Hannah Rebeck would have been sacked had she not previously resigned, and another sergeant, a man called Mark Harper, not the politician it should be said, was given a final written warning over the incident, which will last for 3 years. We remember Sarah Everard, of course. She was kidnapped, raped and murdered in 2021 by a Metropolitan Police officer, Wayne Cousins. She was walking home from a friend's house in Clapham in South London. Peter, lots of crime stories around today. This whole controversy over non-crime hate incidents. I think there'll be a lot of people asking, what is a non-crime hate incident? Can you just explain that to us, and then we'll get into some of the detail about what some of these people have been accused of, saying that someone smells like fish. I mean, it is just utterly ridiculous, Peter.
It truly is. And there's been some confusion over the guidance issued by the College of Policing. That's essentially the body that hands down guidelines for how crime should be investigated and for training of police officers and the such like. And their guidance reads, and I'll quote a bit of it if I may, that an incident should be regarded as a non-crime hate incident if it is clearly motivated by intentional hostility. So that's important. There's got to be intentional hostility. And it then goes on to say there has to be a real risk of escalation, which could cause significant harm or a criminal offence. So that's the guidance as it stands. And I would, of course, argue that a child in school doing some name calling, which might be unpleasant, does not cause significant harm or potentially a criminal offence.
So, begging the question, Peter, why are the police involved in this at all? I can't think of a single thing that happened. I mean, I was bullied at school for a year, and there were horrible things that were said to me. It wouldn't have crossed my mind for a second to have gone to the police about it. It was name calling. It was things that people experience every single day in school. You know, this is just what happens. But if you say that someone smells like fish or has you know, other words that people are using that are unpleasant but not exactly a crime, this is nonetheless something that people are investigating about. I mean, the police have so many other things to do, but this is becoming police work, isn't it? And we wonder why, you know, what I would argue are proper crimes, things like robberies and rapes and murders aren't properly investigated. It's because they're doing this sort of stuff, isn't it, Peter?
And in that regard, the police only have themselves to blame. For the last 20 years or so, the highly educated officers that occupy the senior ranks in policing have turned what used to be a police force into a community service, if you will. And of course, it deals with all the breakdowns in society rather than focusing on what the public want the police to focus on. And that overwhelmingly is locking up bad people and trying to keep the streets safe. That's what the public want. That's what they demand. And when they see that happening, they are very, very supportive of their police. But they're not seeing enough of that. and they're seeing too much of this. And of course, it gets a lot of publicity. And I completely agree with so many people who on social media and in the broader media today have been going, well, if it's not a crime, what are the police doing getting involved?
Yes. A doctor was cited for allegedly misdiagnosing a patient. That's apparently a non-crime hate incident. And someone was subject of a hate complaint for calling a Welsh victim a sheepshagger. And another person was reported for asking whether a Chinese meal came with bats. Obviously, that's a reference to the origins of COVID there, or what many people think are the origins of COVID. A vicar from a local church was the suspect of a hate incident for saying it's a sin to be gay. I mean, I don't believe the Bible when it says it, but it very clearly says it is a sin to be gay. That's what vicars often do. Not every vicar, but a lot of vicars, that is their belief. I mean, this is just out of control. It is out of control. Sarah is in West Sussex and says, my husband has just called me a fatty. Should I contact the police?
Well, Sarah, you might want to contact a lawyer and consider divorcing your husband of such a wicked, spiteful and untruthful
outrageous suggestion, Sarah. I'm sure you're like Cindy Crawford.
Well, either way, her husband needs to have a stern talking to.
Yes, but not by the police. Not by the police. By Sarah, but not by the police.
Not by the police. Not by the police. By you and I, as he's getting at the moment.
Yes, you got a former police officer, you got a talk radio host, Sarah's husband. Don't be nasty, be nice. But this is, I mean, on a more serious note, this is just out of control, Peter. How are the police meant to do their job properly? How are they meant to actually solve real crimes when they're caught up in all of this? And it's not the Bobby on the beat. It's not the people who are doing their job and being good and honest police officers, but they're being told what to do by management, by those at the top.
They are, and in turn, those at the top are told what to do by the Home Office and the College of Policing. So I do have a slight degree of sympathy for the police in that the guidance is a bit unclear. But come on, if you're a senior police officer, you've done some years, you've gone through the promotion process, hopefully you've got some kind of experience behind you, and the most important attribute that any police officer can have, which is, of course, common sense, you're going to say, this is not a matter for the police. This is not a matter for my officers. There are thousands of unsolved crimes that we need to be working on. Let's do that instead.
Peter, just finally, maybe I can get your reaction to this story about breaking this afternoon about 4 teenagers and a 45-year-old man found guilty of murdering 2 boys aged 15 and 16 who were attacked with machetes in a case of mistaken identity. A 5-week trial at Bristol Crown Court. Max Dixon and Mason Rest were killed in a case of mistaken identity, wrongly identified as being responsible for a house attack in an area of the city earlier that evening. This is just tragic and horrific.
My thoughts are all entirely with Max and Mason's relatives and friends and anybody who loved those entirely innocent 2 young boys who were targeted by the main protagonist, a 45-year-old man who drove the other youngsters in his car so that they could carry out this attack, armed with horrific weaponry, the likes of which should not be on our streets. So my thoughts are, of course, with the loved ones. May Max and Mason rest in peace, and may the criminal justice system hand down suitably stern punishments for this disgusting, outrageous and completely unnecessary deaths of 2 teenagers.
Peter, thank you. That's Peter Bleksley there.